The draconic Academy of Strategic Excellence stood like a monument to galactic supremacy on the crystalline moon of Prime. Its obsidian towers pierced the artificial atmosphere, their surfaces carved with the victories of 1,000 generations of dragon nobility. For 3, only the bloodlines had walked these halls, their scaled forms casting long shadows over the lesser species that served them. Pressed his palm against the identification scanner, his human heart hammering against his ribs. The machine hummed for what felt like an eternity before displaying the holographic seal that had become his lifeline. Lord of the Crimson Reaches, heir to the 5th Talon dynasty. The biomimetic disguise wrapped around him like a second skin, complete with synthetic scales that shifted color with his emotions and retractable claws that had taken him months to learn to control. 3 years of living as a dragon among dragons, his true nature hidden beneath layers of stolen genetic material and carefully crafted lies. The Terran Intelligence Corps had deemed this mission impossible, but had volunteered anyway. Humanity needed to understand their enemies, needed someone on the inside when the inevitable war came. What they hadn't expected was for him to excel. The morning sun cast prismatic light through the Academy's great dome as made his way to the final examination chamber. Around him, his fellow cadets moved with the casual arrogance that came with centuries of genetic superiority. Prince, whose bloodline traced back to the legendary fire tyrants, nodded respectfully as passed. Lady Aura, descendant of the Ice Monarchs, actually smiled, a rare honor among dragon nobility. They thought him one of them. That was the beautiful irony of it all. The examination chamber was a vast arena carved from a single piece of black crystal. At its center sat Dragon Matron, her ancient form coiled upon a throne of fused starship hulls, trophies from the wars that had brought a dozen species to their knees. Her eyes, older than some civilizations, fixed upon each entering cadet with the weight of eons. Today, her voice resonated through the chamber like distant thunder, you prove yourselves worthy of the title Draconic Officer. Today, you demonstrate that the fire in your veins burns true, that the wisdom of your ancestors flows through your minds, and that the strength of dragons courses through your bodies. Took his position among the 50 cadets who had survived the Academy's brutal 3-year program. Only half would pass today's final test. Only half would earn the right to command fleets, to burn worlds, to continue the Dragon Empire's endless expansion across the galaxy. The test is simple, continued, her tail lashing with barely contained power. Before you lies a tactical scenario drawn from our greatest military triumph, the subjugation of the systems. 7 species knelt before our might in that campaign. Your task is to recreate that victory, but with a twist. The chamber floor shimmered and transformed into a 3-dimensional holographic battlefield. Star systems spun slowly in the air, their planets marked with the symbols of various alien species. Trade routes glowed like golden threads between worlds, while military installations pulsed with threatening red light. You must achieve total victory, the Dragon Matron declared, but with resources reduced to 1/10 of what our ancestors possessed. Show me that modern dragons have not grown soft with success. Show me that you can burn civilizations with wisdom rather than merely overwhelming force. Studied the scenario as his enhanced vision recorded every detail. He recognized the historical battle from his intelligence briefings. It had been the moment when dragon supremacy became undeniable to the galaxy. 7 thriving civilizations reduced to slave worlds in less than a year. The efficiency had been terrifying. Around him, his fellow cadets began their approaches with predictable dragon thinking. Prince immediately targeted the largest military installation with a massive frontal assault. Lady Aura opted for a strategy of economic strangulation, cutting off trade routes with surgical strikes. Others chose variations on themes of overwhelming force and intimidation. One by one, they failed. The holographic defenders, programmed with the actual tactical responses of the historical species, adapted to each assault. They formed alliances, shared resources, developed countermeasures. What had worked with 10 times the resources became impossible with the reduced fleet strength. Each cadet watched their forces crumble, their pride wounded but their noble bloodline intact. Failure was acceptable when the test was designed to be impossible. Waited until he was among the last to attempt the scenario. He had observed 37 failures, each teaching him something new about both dragon thinking and the defensive capabilities of the simulation. When his turn came, he approached the hologram with steady claws and began implementing a strategy that would have horrified every dragon ancestor who ever lived. Instead of targeting military installations, he struck at civilian infrastructure, but not to destroy it. His virtual fleets disabled communication networks just long enough to broadcast carefully crafted propaganda across all 7 systems simultaneously. The messages, delivered in perfect mimicry of each species' own leaders, spoke of dragon mercy for those who surrendered willingly, of prosperity for worlds that joined the Empire peacefully. But the true genius lay in what he did next. Rather than demanding immediate surrender, virtual forces after delivering the message, leaving behind only small monitoring stations. To the defending species, it appeared that the dragons had shown weakness, perhaps even fear. The alliance between the 7 systems began to fracture as each species wondered if their neighbors might secretly negotiate individual peace deals. Within weeks of simulation time, 3 systems had sent envoys requesting terms, accepted their surrender with false magnanimity, then used their own fleets, now flying dragon colors, to pressure the remaining 4 systems. The cascading effect was devastating. Species turned against species as trust evaporated and self-preservation instincts took hold. The final system fell without firing a single shot in anger. The defenders, surrounded and outnumbered by their former allies, chose capitulation over annihilation. The chamber fell silent as the hologram faded. 50 pairs of dragon eyes stared at with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. What he had done was tactically brilliant, but it violated every principle of honorable dragon warfare. Where was the cleansing fire? Where was the demonstration of superior might? Where was the glory? Dragon Matron's ancient gaze lingered on for a long moment before moving to the next cadet. The test continued, but the damage was done. He had succeeded where others had failed, but in doing so, he had revealed something fundamentally different about his nature. The remaining attempts played out predictably. Noble strategy after noble strategy crumbled against the simulation's adaptive defenses. The dragon way of war, built on of genetic superiority and overwhelming force, proved inadequate when those advantages were stripped away. Honor and tradition became liabilities when facing enemies who fought to survive rather than to prove their worth. When the last cadet failed, Dragon Matron rose from her throne. Her massive form uncoiled with fluid grace, wings spreading wide enough to cast shadows across the entire arena. "The results speak clearly," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Of 50 noble candidates, representing the finest bloodlines in the Empire, 49 have failed to demonstrate the tactical flexibility required of modern dragon officers." Felt his artificial heart skip a beat. He had passed. Against all odds, his human cunning disguised as dragon innovation had succeeded where centuries of breeding and training had failed. "However," continued, and the word fell like a hammer blow, "success achieved through dishonor is no success at all." She gestured toward the failed cadets with something approaching maternal affection. "These noble sons and daughters fought with fire in their hearts and honor in their souls. They upheld the traditions that have made our empire great. Their failure reflects not on their worth, but on the impossibility of the task when stripped of our natural advantages." The Dragon Matron's gaze fixed upon with laser intensity. "But one among you succeeded through trickery and manipulation. One among you chose the path of the snake rather than the dragon. One among you demonstrated that when pressed, they think not like a noble predator, but like something else entirely." The chamber's atmospheric processors seemed to pause, leaving only the sound of 50 beings breathing in perfect, terrified silence. "Lord," spoke his assumed name like a curse, "your tactical success cannot be. You achieved total victory with minimal resources, demonstrating innovation and adaptive thinking that surpasses your peers. By any objective measure, you have proven yourself the superior candidate." Straightened, unsure whether he was about to be praised or executed. "But the Draconic Academy does not train tacticians," the ancient dragon continued. "We forge leaders who embody the noble spirit of our people. We create commanders who inspire through strength, who lead through example, who conquer through the application of superior will and firepower. What you demonstrated today was the thinking of a scavenger species, clever, adaptive, and utterly without honor." The biomimetic disguise felt suddenly fragile around shoulders. Had she discovered his true nature? Was this elaborate theater before a public execution? "Therefore," Dragon Matron declared. While your tactical acumen cannot be questioned, your methods reveal a fundamental incompatibility with dragon values. You think like prey pretending to be a predator, not like a predator who has temporarily forgotten how to hunt. She turned her attention back to the 49 failures, her expression softening with genuine warmth. These noble cadets, though unsuccessful in today's impossible task, have demonstrated that their hearts remain true to our ways. They will be given additional training and another opportunity to prove themselves. The Empire needs officers who think like dragons, even if that thinking must be refined through experience. Felt the weight of dismissal settling around him like a shroud. He had succeeded beyond his wildest hopes, proven himself tactically superior to every dragon noble in his class, and in doing so, he had marked himself as fundamentally other. His very success had become evidence of his alien nature. Lord, the Dragon Matron's voice carried finality, you will report to the administrative wing for reassignment. Your unique perspective may find better application in intelligence analysis or logistics coordination. Positions where tactical innovation can be utilized without the responsibility of embodying our people's noble ideals. The dismissal was couched in diplomatic language, but its meaning was clear. Had passed the test and failed the deeper examination simultaneously. His human thinking, disguised as dragon innovation, had proven too alien for acceptance among the Empire's elite. As his fellow cadets filed out of the chamber, their failure, somehow more honorable than his success, remained standing in the fading holographic light of the simulation chamber. He had learned something valuable today, though not what either he or his handlers had expected. Dragons weren't just physically superior to humans. They weren't just better equipped or more advanced. They were fundamentally different in how they approached conflict, honor, and victory itself. This difference might be their greatest strength, or it might be the weakness that humanity needed to exploit. The biomimetic disguise continued its flawless mimicry of dragon physiology as finally turned to leave the chamber. 3 years of perfect infiltration, and it was his moment of greatest triumph that had nearly exposed him. The irony wasn't lost on him, even as he contemplated the implications of what he had discovered. Dragon Matron watched him go, her ancient eyes unreadable. Whether she suspected the truth about Lord's identity or simply recognized alien thinking when she saw it, would probably never know. But as he walked through the Academy's obsidian corridors for what might be the last time, he carried with him intelligence that could reshape humanity's understanding of their enemies. The dragons could be beaten, not through superior force or advanced technology, but by thinking in ways they considered beneath them, by fighting like prey instead of predators, by winning through methods they found so distasteful that victory itself became meaningless. Smiled beneath his synthetic scales. The dragon nobility's greatest strength, their unshakable belief in their own superiority, might just be the key to their downfall. The Intelligence Analysis Division occupied the lowest levels of the Draconic Academy, buried beneath layers of stone and metal where the shame of non-combat roles could be hidden from noble eyes. Descended through increasingly utilitarian corridors, his biomimetic disguise registering the subtle environmental changes, with synthetic sensory organs that felt almost real after 3 years of constant use. His new assignment came with a modest office, a security clearance that would have made his Terran handlers weep with joy, and the crushing realization that his cover identity was now permanently marked as defective nobility. Lord, the dragon who thought like prey, relegated to pushing data crystals around in the basement while his former classmates prepared for fleet commands. The irony was delicious, even if the circumstances were frustrating. Captain Dews, his new supervisor, possessed the typical build of a dragon intelligence officer, smaller than the warrior caste, with scales that had faded from disuse rather than battle scarring. Her eyes held the peculiar sharpness of someone who had spent decades analyzing threats from the shadows, while others claimed glory in the light. Your tactical analysis from the final examination has generated considerable discussion, she informed during his first briefing, her claws tapping against a data pad with mechanical precision. The Strategic Council found your methods, illuminating if distasteful. They want you to apply that same unconventional thinking to our current intelligence priorities. Maintained the carefully neutral expression he had perfected over 3 years of dragon social interaction. What priorities require such analysis, Captain? Dews activated a holographic display that filled the small office with star charts and tactical overlays. The Terran situation has become increasingly complex. Our fleets continue to probe their outer colonies, but the humans have demonstrated surprising resilience. Their defensive capabilities exceed our initial estimates, and their strategic responses have been unexpected. The display showed the current frontier between Dragon space and the struggling Terran Federation. Red markers indicated successful Dragon raids, while blue markers showed human colonies that had successfully repelled attacks or evacuated before strikes could land. Studied the pattern with genuine professional interest, noting details that his training allowed him to recognize, but his cover identity could never explain. The Strategic Council believes the humans may have developed new tactical doctrines based on intelligence gathered from previous encounters, Dews continued. Your assignment is to analyze their defensive patterns and predict their likely strategic evolution. Think like prey, as you demonstrated so effectively in your examination, and tell us how prey might seek to harm predators. Almost laughed at the elegance of the situation. His dragon masters wanted him to think like a human in order to better understand human thinking, never suspecting that they had assigned an actual human to the task. The biomimetic disguise maintained its perfect facade while his mind raced through the implications. I'll need access to all available intelligence on Terran defensive actions, he replied carefully. Battle recordings, intercepted communications, captured equipment specifications. The more data available, the more accurate my analysis will be. Already approved, Dews gestured to his workstation, where security clearances were updating in real time. The Council is eager for results. They've grown tired of expensive raids that accomplish little beyond destroying empty colonies. They want to understand why the humans keep fighting when logic dictates they should surrender. Over the following days, immersed himself in a treasure trove of classified intelligence that revealed the true scope of the dragon-human conflict. The official propaganda painted the war as a series of glorious victories against stubborn primitives, but the classified reports told a different story. Human forces were learning, adapting, evolving their tactics with each encounter. More troubling for dragon strategists, they were doing so far faster than any previous species. The species had taken decades to develop effective countermeasures to dragon tactics, and even then, their resistance had been broken through overwhelming force. The Confederacy had shown similar patterns of slow adaptation followed by inevitable defeat. But humans were different. They seemed to absorb tactical lessons instantly, implementing countermeasures and innovations within weeks of each engagement. Found himself in the surreal position of analyzing his own species' military capabilities from the perspective of their enemies. The intelligence files contained detailed breakdowns of human ship designs, weapon systems, and tactical doctrines, information that would have been invaluable to Terran military planners. But accessing it required maintaining his cover, and maintaining his cover meant appearing to work against human interests. The deeper he dug into the classified materials, the more he understood the scope of the challenge facing humanity. The Dragon Empire wasn't just militarily superior. They possessed manufacturing capabilities that human industrial capacity by several orders of magnitude. Their technology base was more advanced. Their population numbered in the hundreds of billions across dozens of star systems. By any rational analysis, the war should have been over before it began. Yet humans kept fighting, kept adapting, kept finding ways to make dragon victories costly enough to matter. Began to see patterns in the data that his dragon colleagues missed, not because of superior analytical ability, but because he understood the human mindset that drove those patterns. Humans didn't fight like any other species the dragons had encountered. They didn't seek to match dragon strengths or compete on dragon terms. Instead, they fought asymmetrically, avoiding direct confrontation while striking at logistics, communications, and morale. They retreated from battles they couldn't win while inflicting maximum casualties on dragon forces through improvised weapons and desperate tactics. Most importantly, they shared information. Every human defeat became a lesson transmitted instantly to every other human military unit. The dragon's traditional strategy of fighting each enemy fleet or colony in isolation became impossible when their opponents treated every engagement as a learning experience for the entire species. Began drafting his analysis with a growing sense of unease. The conclusions he was reaching would be valuable to dragon strategic planners, potentially helping them develop countermeasures to human adaptive tactics. But they would also provide insights that could be crucial to human survival if transmitted through the right channels. The biomimetic disguise registered stress responses he couldn't entirely suppress as he contemplated the ethical implications. He was a spy, trained to gather intelligence regardless of personal cost. But he was also human, genetically and culturally bound to his species in ways that 3 years of perfect dragon impersonation couldn't erase. His analysis took shape over several weeks, a comprehensive document that outlined human tactical philosophy from what he hoped appeared to be an alien perspective. He described humans as a species that prioritized survival over honor, adaptation over tradition, collective learning over individual glory. To dragon eyes, these traits appeared as weaknesses, the thinking of prey animals rather than noble predators. But knew better. Those same traits that made humans appear weak to dragon sensibilities were actually their greatest strengths. Humans didn't fight for honor or glory, they fought to survive. And a species fighting for survival would consider any tactic, any strategy, any sacrifice that increased their chances of continued existence. The report recommended that dragon forces prepare for increasingly unpredictable human responses. Where previous enemies had followed logical patterns based on their cultural values, humans seemed willing to abandon any principle or tradition if doing so provided tactical advantage. They would retreat when honor demanded they fight. They would fight when logic demanded they flee. They would sacrifice valuable assets to achieve minimal gains if those gains provided strategic intelligence. Fascinating work, Captain Dews commented when submitted his preliminary findings. Your analysis suggests the humans think more like you demonstrated in your final examination, tactically flexible but strategically unprincipled. Nodded thoughtfully. They appear to be a species that has evolved past the concept of honorable defeat. They will try anything that might work, regardless of how it reflects on their dignity. Disturbing, Dews agreed, but valuable intelligence. The Strategic Council will want you to develop specific recommendations for countering these adaptive tendencies. That night, alone in his quarters deep beneath the academy, faced the reality of his situation. He had successfully infiltrated the highest levels of dragon military intelligence, gained access to classified strategic information, and positioned himself to influence enemy planning. By any measure, his mission was succeeding beyond the wildest dreams of his Terran handlers. But success came with a price he hadn't anticipated. The deeper he integrated into dragon military intelligence, the more valuable his contributions became to their war effort. His insights into human psychology were already being incorporated into strategic planning. His recommendations would shape future dragon operations against human colonies. He was becoming complicit in planning attacks against his own species. The biomimetic disguise monitored his stress levels and automatically adjusted hormone production to maintain the perfect facade of dragon physiology. But beneath the synthetic scales and manufactured biochemistry, felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his shoulders. His next assignment arrived within days. Develop specific tactical recommendations for defeating human adaptive learning. The Strategic Council wanted detailed plans for preventing humans from sharing intelligence between military units, strategies for forcing them to fight on dragon terms rather than their preferred asymmetric warfare, and methods for exploiting what dragon analysts perceived as human psychological weaknesses. Stared at the assignment parameters with growing horror. They weren't just asking him to analyze human tactics. They were asking him to design the strategies that would destroy human resistance entirely. His cover identity had become so successful that dragon leadership trusted him to architect his own species' defeat. The irony was no longer amusing. It was becoming a nightmare. Days turned into weeks as struggled with the assignment. He produced reports that appeared useful while actually containing subtle flaws that would limit their effectiveness. He recommended strategies that seemed logical from dragon perspective, but would actually play into human strengths. He suggested targeting patterns that would provide early warning to human forces while appearing to offer tactical advantages. But each deception required careful balance. Too obvious, and his cover would be blown, ending not just his mission but likely his life. Too subtle, and his recommendations might actually prove useful to dragon strategic planning. The line between maintaining his disguise and sabotaging his species' enemies became increasingly difficult to navigate. Captain Dews reviewed his work with growing enthusiasm. "Brilliant analysis, Lord. Your recommendations for disrupting human communication networks show real strategic insight. The Council is particularly interested in your suggestions for forcing them into direct confrontation." Accepted the praise with carefully modulated dragon pride, while mentally calculating how many human lives might be lost if his deceptions failed. The weight of potential consequences pressed against his consciousness like a physical burden, testing the limits of his psychological conditioning. His encrypted reports to Terran intelligence became exercises in carefully coded warnings disguised as intelligence updates. He documented Dragon fleet movements, strategic priorities, and technological capabilities, while subtly indicating which of his own recommendations should be ignored and which contained genuine threats. But the communication delays inherent in deep cover operations meant he had no way of knowing whether his warnings were being received, understood, or acted upon. He was operating in an intelligence vacuum, making decisions that could affect millions of lives without any feedback from his handlers or knowledge of the broader strategic situation. The isolation was becoming unbearable. 3 years of living as Lord, the defective dragon noble who thought like prey, had created a psychological prison that grew smaller with each passing day. He could trust no one, confide in no one, reveal his true self to no one. The biomimetic disguise maintained perfect physical mimicry, while his human consciousness slowly fragmented under the pressure of constant deception. Late at night, in the privacy of his quarters, would sometimes catch himself thinking in dragon patterns, considering human resistance from the perspective of his cover identity rather than his true nature. The line between Terran intelligence operative and Lord Dragon analyst was beginning to blur in disturbing ways. He was becoming the very thing he pretended to be, and the transformation terrified him more than discovery ever could. The emergency klaxons shattered uneasy sleep, their piercing wail echoing through the Academy's lower levels with urgent intensity. Red emergency lighting bathed his quarters in crimson shadows as he rolled from his sleeping alcove, synthetic scales automatically adjusting to mimic the stress responses of a startled dragon. 3 years of constant vigilance had trained his body to react before his mind fully processed the situation. The biomimetic disguise registered elevated heart rate, increased respiration, and heightened alertness, all perfectly normal responses for a dragon awakened by crisis alerts. But beneath the artificial biochemistry felt a different kind of fear. Emergency protocols at the Academy meant only one thing: active military crisis requiring immediate strategic response. His personal communicator activated before he could reach for it, Captain Dews's voice crackling through the speaker with barely controlled excitement. "All intelligence personnel report immediately. Priority Alpha protocols in effect. Lord, bring your analysis files on Terran tactical patterns. The Council requires immediate consultation." Dressed quickly, his movements automatic after years of military conditioning disguised as noble breeding. The corridors hummed with activity as dragon officers rushed toward their assignments, their scaled forms moving with purpose through passages normally reserved for quiet academic pursuits. The Strategic Council chamber occupied the Academy's highest tower, a vast crystalline dome that provided panoramic views of Prime's artificial landscape. Had never been granted access to this level before. His status as defective nobility typically barred him from such elevated circles. But crisis had a way of breaking down social barriers when expertise became more valuable than bloodline purity. Dragon Matron dominated the chamber from her elevated throne, her ancient form radiating controlled fury that made the air itself seem to vibrate with potential energy. Around her, the Empire's highest military officials clustered around holographic displays, showing real-time strategic data from across Dragon space. Recognized the tactical situation immediately, though he maintained careful neutrality as his enhanced vision recorded every detail. A major human offensive was across 3 separate fronts, coordinated strikes that demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive learning his reports had warned about. But this wasn't the desperate, asymmetric resistance the dragons had grown accustomed to fighting. This was professional, organized, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Lord's voice cut through the chamber's tactical discussions like a blade. Your analysis predicted increased human coordination. Explain this. The holographic displays showed human fleets emerging from hyperspace with perfect timing across dozens of star systems simultaneously. Not the ragged evacuation fleets and improvised defensive squadrons the Dragons expected, but professional military formations equipped with technology that shouldn't have existed in human space. Studied the tactical data with growing amazement hidden beneath his dragon facade. These weren't the desperate colonies and scattered defense forces his intelligence files had documented. These were proper battle fleets, organized and equipped for aggressive operations against superior enemies. The coordination suggests significant advancement in their communication capabilities, he replied carefully, his mind racing through implications. But the force composition indicates access to manufacturing resources beyond their documented industrial capacity. Admiral, whose scales bore the scars of a dozen conquered worlds, gestured angrily at the displays. These aren't the prey animals we've been hunting for 3 years. These formations move like professional military forces. Their equipment signatures match nothing in our intelligence databases. Felt a chill of realization that had nothing to do with the chamber's atmospheric controls. The human forces attacking Dragon positions weren't Terran Federation units at all. The ship configurations, tactical movements, and operational patterns were completely unfamiliar. Either humanity had a complete military revolution, or they had gained allies the Dragons knew nothing about. Analysis suggests external support, he said carefully. The tactical doctrines displayed here incorporate elements from multiple strategic traditions. This appears to be coalition warfare rather than purely human operations. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of holographic projectors. Dragon military doctrine had never seriously considered the possibility of alien species allying with humans. Every previous conquered race had fought alone, their resistance crushed in isolation before they could seek or receive outside assistance. Impossible, growled General Han, his massive claws scoring grooves in the crystalline floor. No species would ally with prey against predators. The humans have no strategic value as partners. They possess no resources worth sharing, no technology worth trading for, no military capabilities worth the risk of dragon retaliation. Watch the tactical displays with growing understanding. The human ships were operating in formation with vessels bearing unfamiliar designs, sleek constructions that moved with fluid grace unlike anything in dragon or human technology databases. Other ships displayed the angular geometry and energy signatures characteristic of the Confederacy, which supposedly had been completely subjugated decades earlier. He said quietly, the words emerging before he could fully consider their implications. Some of their fleets must have escaped the final subjugation campaigns. They've been rebuilding in secret, and now they're using human territory as a staging ground for renewed resistance. The silence that followed his observation carried weight that pressed against his consciousness like a physical force. Dragon military doctrine assumed that conquered species remained conquered, their resistance permanently broken by the demonstration of overwhelming superiority. The possibility that defeated enemies might regroup and return stronger was outside their strategic paradigm. Verify this analysis, Dragon Matron commanded, her ancient eyes fixed on with uncomfortable intensity. If they have indeed survived and allied with the humans, this changes the strategic situation entirely. Over the following hours, found himself at the center of a crisis that revealed fundamental flaws in Dragon strategic thinking. The Empire's intelligence apparatus had been designed to monitor conquered territories for compliance, not to track the movements of supposedly extinct military forces. Their surveillance focused on preventing rebellion among subjugated populations rather than detecting external threats operating from beyond monitored space. The human offensive was revealing the scope of dragon blindness in real time. Ships emerged from hiding places throughout the frontier regions, their crews consisting of survivors who had spent decades planning this moment. Other vessels bore the markings of species that supposedly had been extinct for generations. The Rigel Syndicate, the League even scattered survivors of the ancient Vega hegemony. Realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A coalition of the conquered striking back at their oppressors with coordinated force. Humanity hadn't just survived dragon attacks, They had become the rallying point for every species with grievances against the Empire. The humans serve as a coordination hub, he explained to the assembled Dragon leadership, his analysis becoming more accurate as he abandoned the need for deception. Their adaptive learning capabilities make them ideal partners for sharing tactical intelligence. Their manufacturing flexibility allows rapid production of specialized equipment for coalition partners. Their strategic thinking provides the asymmetric approaches necessary to challenge conventionally superior forces. The implications were staggering. Dragon military supremacy depended on fighting enemies one at a time, applying overwhelming force to crush resistance before it could spread. But humans had somehow united the galaxy's survivors into a coherent alliance that shared resources, intelligence, and tactical innovations across species barriers. Admiral's claws scraped against her throne as she leaned forward with predatory intensity. How do we counter this development? Your analysis of human thinking, apply it to this coalition. How do we break their coordination? Felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a shroud. His dragon superiors were asking him to architect the destruction of humanity's greatest hope for survival. The coalition represented everything he had dreamed of during his years of lonely infiltration, proof that the galaxy's conquered peoples could unite against their oppressors. But his cover identity demanded that he provide tactical recommendations for defeating that coalition. Lord, the defective dragon noble who thought like prey, would be expected to understand exactly how prey animals might be turned against each other. Coalition warfare requires constant communication and resource sharing, he said slowly, each word carefully chosen. Disrupting their coordination networks would force individual species to operate in isolation, target their manufacturing centers to prevent equipment sharing, create situations that force them to choose between defending their own territories and supporting coalition objectives. Even as he spoke, embedded subtle flaws in his recommendations. Communication networks could be protected with proper encryption and redundancy. Manufacturing could be decentralized and mobile. Species coordination could adapt to operate under communications blackout if properly prepared. But his dragon audience heard only the surface analysis, nodding approvingly as he outlined strategies they believed would shatter the unexpected alliance. Their cultural blindness to asymmetric thinking prevented them from recognizing the defensive measures he was subtly suggesting. Brilliant tactical insight, Dragon Matron declared. Lord, you will coordinate with Fleet Command to implement these countermeasures immediately. Your understanding of prey behavior has proven invaluable. As the emergency session concluded and Dragon officers rushed to implement his recommendations, remained in the council chamber, staring at the tactical displays that showed the scope of the galactic uprising. His infiltration mission had succeeded beyond all expectation. He had gained access to the highest levels of Dragon strategic planning and influenced their response to humanity's greatest military undertaking. But success felt hollow as he contemplated the consequences of his deceptions. His flawed recommendations might buy the coalition time, but they wouldn't fundamentally alter the balance of power. The Dragon Empire possessed overwhelming material advantages that couldn't be overcome through clever tactics alone. Unless someone provided the coalition with intelligence they desperately needed. Made his decision with the same calm determination that had sustained him through 3 years of perfect impersonation. He activated his personal communicator and began transmitting what appeared to be routine intelligence updates to his Terran handlers. But embedded within the routine reports, encoded in patterns only human cryptographers would recognize, he included the complete strategic disposition of Dragon forces across the Empire. Fleet locations, supply lines, manufacturing centers, communication hubs, everything he had learned during his infiltration poured through encrypted channels toward coalition intelligence services. The information would take weeks to reach its intended recipients through the complex relay networks necessary to maintain his cover. But when it arrived, it would provide human and allied commanders with unprecedented insight into Dragon vulnerabilities. He was committing the ultimate betrayal of his cover identity, providing enemy intelligence that could reshape the entire war. If discovered, his death would be swift but exceptionally unpleasant by Dragon standards. But the alternative was watching the galaxy's last hope for freedom crushed by forces he could have helped defeat. The biomimetic disguise maintained its perfect facade as walked through the Academy's corridors, outwardly calm while internally burning with the fire of rebellion. 3 years of living as Lord had taught him to think like a dragon when necessary, but his human core remained unbroken beneath the synthetic scales and manufactured heritage. Dragon Matron watched him go from the council chamber's observation deck, her ancient eyes tracking his movement with thoughtful precision. When he disappeared from view, she activated her private communicator and spoke a single word that would have frozen's blood if he had heard it. Confirmed. The Academy's security forces moved with silent efficiency, sealing exits and activating scanning arrays designed to detect biological inconsistencies. 3 years of perfect impersonation were about to end in the most dramatic way possible. But in the depths of space, Coalition fleets were already receiving intelligence updates that would change everything. His mission was complete, regardless of what happened to Lord in the hours to come. The galaxy's conquered peoples were no longer fighting blind against an enemy they couldn't understand. They had maps now, showing exactly where to strike to hurt the Dragon Empire most effectively. And sometimes that knowledge was worth any price, even the life of the spy who had made it possible. The final irony was that he'd learned to think like both predator and prey during his years of infiltration. He understood dragon psychology well enough to predict their responses to his intelligence gifts. They would adapt, certainly, but adaptation took time, and time was what the Coalition needed most. In the end, perhaps that was the most human thing of all, sacrificing individual survival for the chance that others might live free. It wasn't the dragon way, with its emphasis on personal glory and individual dominance. It wasn't even particularly logical by the cold calculations of military necessity. But it was profoundly, unmistakably human. And in a galaxy where dragons ruled through the assumption that all other species would eventually kneel rather than die, that humanity itself might be the most powerful weapon of all.